Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. This time, we're going to explore something pretty amazing, and it's something you carry with you everywhere you go, the human body. We're going to dive deep into human anatomy and physiology, but don't worry, we're not going to get too bogged down in like all the crazy textbook details.
Yeah.
We'll try to keep things pretty straightforward and focus on the big picture.
Sounds good. I'm excited to get started.
All right, so we've got a ton of sources to draw from, which is always exciting. And I think one of the goals today should be to really grasp how incredible this machine we call the human body really is, right? I mean, it's doing so much behind the scenes, keeping us alive and kicking without us even having to think about it.
That's right. It's pretty mind-blowing when you stop and think about it.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we get ahead of ourselves, let's lay down some groundwork, shall we? What exactly is the difference between anatomy and physiology? I always get those two mixed up.
Well, it's a great question, and it's important to have a clear understanding of both because they go hand in hand. So think of anatomy as the study of the body's structure. It's like looking at a blueprint. You're identifying all the parts, the organs, the tissues, the bones, and seeing how they're all put together. Physiology, on the other hand, is all about how those parts actually work. It's like figuring out how the plumbing, electrical, and heating systems in a house all function together to keep things running smoothly.
Okay, that makes it. So anatomy is like the what and physiology is the how.
Yeah, exactly. And they're totally inseparable, right? You can't understand how the body works without understanding its structure, and the structure itself is shaped by its function.
Right. It's all connected. Okay, so let's take an example, something we can all relate to. Our skin. Did you know that skin is actually our largest organ?
It is. We often don't think about it that way, but it's true. And it's a perfect example of how anatomy and physiology are intertwined.
Okay, so tell me more about the skin.
Well, first off, anatomically, it's got these distinct layers. We've got the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. Each layer has its own specific structure and composition, and those differences determine how it functions.
Okay, I'm following you. So the skin has these different layers, each with its own structure. And how does that translate into the function, the physiology?
Well, take the epidermis, for example. That's the outermost layer, the one we see and touch. It's mainly made up of these tough cells called keratinocytes, which produce keratin, a protein that gives skin its strength and resilience. So the structure of the epidermis, with its layers of keratinocytes, directly contributes to its function as a protective barrier. It helps keep out harmful stuff like bacteria and viruses, prevents water loss, and even protects us from those harmful UV rays from the sun.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. And what about the dermis, the layer beneath the epidermis? What's going on there?
Well, the dermis is a thicker layer, and it's got connective tissue, blood vessels, nerves, hair follicles, sweat glands, you name it. It provides support and nourishment to the epidermis, and those blood vessels help regulate body temperature, and the nerves allow us to feel sensations like touch, pressure, heat, and cold. So again, the structure of the dermis directly dictates its function.
Right. It's all coming together now.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the skin as an example of how anatomy and physiology are connected. But let's zoom out for a second and think about the bigger picture. How is the human body organized, starting from the tiniest building blocks?
Well, it's really a hierarchy of complexity, starting with the most fundamental level. Atoms. Remember atoms from chemistry class, right? The smallest units of matter. And those atoms bond together to form molecules, which are the building blocks of all chemical compounds.
Okay, so if atoms are like, individual Lego bricks, then molecules are the elaborate structures you can build with those bricks.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And it's important to remember that it's the electrons, those tiny particles whizzing around the nucleus of an atom, that really drive the action, especially those in the outermost shell, the valence shell. They're the ones that determine how an atom interacts with other atoms, how it forms bonds.
So those valence electrons are like the social butterflies of the atomic world. They're all about making connections.
Yeah, you could say that. And those connections, those bonds, are what hold everything together.
Wow, so all this bonding is happening at such a tiny scale, but it ultimately determines the structure and function of everything in our bodies.
Exactly. And another important concept at this chemical level is pH. It's a measure of how acidic or basic a solution is, and it plays a crucial role in maintaining the body's internal environment. We need to maintain a very specific pH range for all our internal processes to function correctly.
So it's like pH is this invisible force keeping our internal environment stable.
Yes, it's all about balance, and that balance is crucial for life.
Okay, so we've got atoms bonding to form molecules and pH playing a role in keeping things balanced. What's the next step in this hierarchy of organization?
Well, from molecules, we move up to cells, which are the fundamental units of life. They're like tiny factories that carry out all the functions necessary for survival. Each cell has a membrane that encloses it, and inside you find specialized structures called organelles.
So if the cell is the factory, then organelles are like the different departments, each with a specific job to do.
Exactly. And it's amazing how all those different organelles work together, coordinating their activities to keep the cell functioning smoothly.
It's mind-blowing to think that every cell in our body contains the same DNA blueprint, yet they differentiate into hundreds of different types, each with unique structures and functions. How does that even happen?
It really is remarkable. It's like having the same set of instructions, but interpreting them in vastly different ways. Take neurons, for example, those nerve cells that transmit signals throughout the body. They have these long, slender extensions called axons and dendrites, specifically designed for transmitting those electrical signals.
It's like our own internal communication network.
It is. It's an intricate and incredibly efficient system.
So we've got cells with their specialized organelles. What comes next?
Well, when similar cells group together to perform a specific function, they form tissues. Think about muscle tissue, for example. It's designed for contraction, allowing for movement. Then you have nervous tissue, responsible for transmitting signals, epithelial tissue for covering and lining surfaces, and connective tissue for, well, connecting things.
Got it. So it's like different types of fabric coming together to create a complex garment.
A great analogy. And when different tissues work together, they form.
Organs, like the heart, lungs, liver, kidneys.
Yes. Each organ is a complex structure with a specialized function composed of different tissues working in harmony.
And to top it all off, we have organ systems, where multiple organs work together to carry out even broader functions.
You got it. Like the digestive system, which breaks down food and absorbs nutrients, the cardiovascular system, transporting blood throughout the body, or the nervous system, controlling and coordinating everything.
Wow. We've gone from tiny atoms to complex systems. It's mind-boggling how everything is connected. But there's one thing I'm still curious about. Homeostasis. You mentioned it earlier in relation to pH. How does it apply to the body as a whole?
Well, homeostasis is one of the most fundamental principles in biology. It's the body's ability to maintain a stable internal environment despite constant changes in the external world. Imagine it like a thermostat in a house, constantly adjusting to keep the temperature comfortable no matter what the weather's like outside.
So it's like this invisible force keeping everything in balance, making sure all the systems are working together in harmony.
Yeah, exactly. And it involves a lot of intricate feedback loops and mechanisms. For example, when you get hot, your body sweats to cool down. When you get cold, you shiver to generate heat. These are examples of negative feedback loops, a key part of homeostasis.
It's like a constant tug of war, keeping everything within a narrow, healthy range.
Right. Another great example is the control of blood sugar levels. When you eat, your blood sugar rises and your body releases insulin to help cells take up that glucose from the blood, bringing blood sugar back down. And when blood sugar drops too low, another hormone called glucagon signals the liver to release stored glucose. It's all about maintaining that balance.
It's incredible. It makes you realize how much is going on behind the scenes to keep us functioning properly.
It really does.
Okay, so we've talked about homeostasis. Now, before we move on to specific systems, let's tackle something that can be a bit intimidating. Anatomical terminology. All those terms can sound like a foreign language.
I know what you mean, but once you learn the basics, it really helps to unlock a deeper understanding of the body.
Okay, so where do we even begin?
Let's start with body positions. The standard reference point is called the anatomical position. Picture someone standing upright, feet together, palms facing forward, thumbs pointing away from the body. It's like a neutral stance, a starting point for describing location and movement.
Okay, I can picture that. So what about terms like supine and prone? I've heard those before, but I'm not always sure what they mean.
So supine just means lying face up, like you're stargazing, and prone means lying face down, like if you're reading a book on the beach, on your stomach.
Okay, so it's all about the position of the body. That makes sense. Now, what about all those words that describe specific areas of the body? I always get tripped up by terms like brachium and antebrachium. They sound so technical.
They do, but they're simpler than they sound. Brachium just means upper arm, from shoulder to elbow, and antebrachium is the forearm, from elbow to wrist.
Oh, okay. So It's not just about memorizing random words. It's about understanding a system of description.
Exactly. And once you grasp the system, it becomes much easier to navigate.
I like that. Makes it seem less intimidating.
Right. And then there are directional terms, which describe relative position, like anterior means toward the front of the body, and posterior means toward the back. So your nose is anterior to your ears, and your spine is posterior to your heart.
Okay, I'm getting it. So anterior is like the front row at a concert, and posterior is way in the back.
Aha, I like that analogy.
Hmm.
Then we have medial, meaning towards the midline of the body, and lateral, meaning away from the midline. So your eyes are medial to your ears, and your thumbs are lateral to your pinky fingers.
Okay, so it's all about creating a mental map of the body, understanding where things are located in relation to each other.
Exactly. And there are a few more to keep in mind. We have superior, meaning above, and inferior, meaning below. So your head is superior to your chest, and your feet are inferior to your knees.
Okay, I think I can handle those. I'm starting to feel like I can actually speak anatomy.
That's the spirit. And speaking of maps, let's talk about how the body is organized into cavities.
Okay, cavities, those are the spaces within the body that contain and protect our organs, right?
Right. We have the dorsal cavity at the back of the body, which houses the central nervous system. It's like a protective shell. Within the dorsal cavity, we have the cranial cavity, which encases the brain, and the spinal cavity, protecting the spinal cord.
So it's like a suit of armor for our most important nervous system components.
Exactly. And then at the front of the body, we have the ventral cavity. It's a larger space, further divided into the thoracic cavity, which contains the heart and lungs, and the abdominopelvic cavity below that.
Okay, so the thoracic cavity is in the chest, and the abdominopelvic cavity is, well, in the abdomen and pelvis.
You got it. And the abdominopelvic cavity houses a whole bunch of organs. Stomach, intestines, liver, kidneys, reproductive organs, and more.
Wow, that's a lot to pack in there.
It is, but it's all organized in a very efficient way. And these cavities aren't just empty spaces. They're lined with membranes and filled with fluids that help cushion and protect the organs inside.
So it's like each organ has its own little compartment, all neatly arranged within these larger cavities.
Exactly. It's all about protection and organization.
It's amazing how everything fits together so perfectly.
It really is. And speaking of seeing inside the body, have you ever wondered how doctors actually see what's going on in there? That's where modern medical imaging techniques like X-rays and CT scans come in.
Oh, right. X-rays are like taking a shadow picture of the inside of the body using radiation to create an image. And CT scans are like 3D X-rays, taking multiple images from different angles to build a more complete picture.
Exactly. And those technologies have revolutionized medicine, allowing doctors to diagnose and treat a wide range of conditions with much greater precision.
It's incredible how technology allows us to peer inside the body without even making an incision. It's like having a superpower.
It is, and it's just one example of how technology is constantly pushing the boundaries of what we know and understand about the human body.
It's pretty mind-blowing. Okay, so we've covered a lot of foundational ground here. The structural organization from atoms to organ systems, that concept of homeostasis, and even some anatomical terminology to help us navigate this complex landscape.
We've had a good overview so far.
Yeah, I think we're ready to dive into some specific systems now. What do you think? Where should we start?
Well, how about we start with something we all interact with every day, but might not always think of as an organ? The skin.
The skin. Okay, that sounds interesting. Let's do it.
All right, so let's talk about the skin. It's our largest organ, as we mentioned, and it plays a vital role in protecting us from the outside world. It's like a shield against all sorts of things.
Right. I mean, it's our first line of defense against like bacteria and viruses and just all that nasty stuff out there.
Exactly. It keeps those harmful invaders out, and it also helps regulate our body temperature, prevents water loss, and even produces vitamin D. So it's a pretty busy organ.
Wow. I knew it was important, but I didn't realize it did all that. So tell me more about like the structure of the skin. How does it actually do all those things?
Well, remember those layers we talked about earlier? The epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis?
Yeah, I remember those.
Okay, so the epidermis is the outermost layer, the one we see and touch. And it's mainly made up of these cells called keratinocytes. They produce keratin, which is a tough, fibrous protein that gives skin its strength and resilience.
Wait, keratin? Isn't that what our hair and nails are made of too?
You got it. It's the same stuff. Keratin's a key structural component of the whole integumentary system, which includes the skin, hair, and nails. And the epidermis itself has multiple layers. The deepest layer is the stratum basal, and that's where new keratinocytes are constantly being produced.
Oh, so it's like a little skin cell factory down there.
Yeah, exactly. And as those new cells are produced, they get pushed upwards towards the surface. And as they move up, they go through a process called keratinization. Basically, they fill up with keratin, eventually die, and form that tough outer layer of skin we see and feel, the stratum corneum. It's constantly being shed and replaced.
So it's like our skin is constantly renewing itself. That's pretty cool.
It is. It's a very efficient system.
Yeah.
Now, moving on to the dermis, that's the layer beneath the epidermis, and it's a lot thicker and has a bunch of stuff going on. It's got connective tissue, blood vessels, nerves, hair follicles, sweat glands, sebaceous glands, which produce sebum, that oily substance that keeps skin lubricated and waterproof.
So the dermis is like the bustling city beneath the skin's surface, keeping everything running smoothly.
Exactly. And then finally, we have the hypodermis, or the subcutaneous fat layer. It provides insulation, cushioning, and acts as an energy store.
Right, so it's like our internal padding.
Yeah, you could say that. It helps keep us warm and protect our bones and muscles from impact.
So we've got this amazing multi-layered organ that's protecting us, regulating our temperature, producing vitamin D, and all sorts of other stuff. It's pretty incredible when you think about it.
It really is, and we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to learn about the skin and all its amazing functions.
Well, maybe we can do a whole deep dive just on skin sometime. But for now, let's move on to another fascinating system, the skeletal system.
The skeletal system. Okay, that's a good one. It's a masterpiece of engineering, providing support, protection, and the foundation for movement.
I've always been fascinated by skeletons. I mean, it's amazing how all those bones fit together to create such a strong yet flexible structure. It's like nature's own scaffolding, isn't it?
It is. It's what gives our body its shape and allows us to stand upright and move around. But it does more than just provide structure. It also plays a critical role in producing blood cells within the bone marrow. It stores essential minerals like calcium and phosphorus. And it even contributes to maintaining our pH balance.
Wow, so it's not just about structure, it's involved in all sorts of essential functions.
Right. It's a very dynamic system. Now, how many bones do you think the average adult human has?
I feel like I should know this, but I'm drawing a blank. 200.
Close. It's typically 206 bones.
Oh, okay, 206. That's a lot of bones. And they come in all shapes and sizes, don't they?
They do. You've got long bones like the femur and the thigh and the humerus in the arm. They act like levers for movement. Then you've got short bones like those in the wrist and ankle. They're more about stability and support.
Right, and then there are flat bones, like the ribs and the skull bones, which are there to protect our internal organs.
Exactly. And then you've got the irregular bones like the vertebrae that make up our spine. They have more complex shapes to allow for a wider range of motion.
It's like nature's own Lego set, with different pieces designed for specific purposes.
I love that analogy. And speaking of design, have you ever thought about how bones are actually formed? It's a fascinating process called ossification.
Ossification. Yeah, I remember hearing that term before. It involves replacing connective tissue with bone tissue, right? But I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
Well, there are actually two main types of ossification: intramembranous ossification and endochondral ossification.
Okay, those are some big words. What's the difference?
So intramembranous ossification is like building a bone from scratch. It's how flat bones are formed directly from a type of embryonic connective tissue. Endochondral ossification is a bit more indirect. It involves replacing a hyaline cartilage model with bone tissue. It's how most of our bones are formed, including the long bones.
Okay, so it's like building a bone from a blueprint.
Exactly. And this process begins during embryonic development and continues throughout childhood and adolescence. Remember those growth plates? They're called epiphyseal plates, and they're responsible for bone lengthening. They eventually close, usually in early adulthood, and that signals the end of that growth phase.
Oh, so that's why we can't grow taller after a certain age.
Right. Once those growth plates close, bone lengthening pretty much stops. But even though bone growth stops, there's still a lot of activity happening within the bones.
Really? What do you mean?
Well, bone is a dynamic tissue. It's constantly being remodeled throughout life. Cells called osteoclasts break down old bone tissue, while osteoblasts build new bone. It's like a constant construction project happening within our skeletons.
So it's not just a static structure, it's constantly adapting and renewing itself.
Exactly. And this remodeling allows bones to adapt to changes in stress and maintain their strength and integrity.
That's amazing.
Right.
Our bodies are so much more dynamic than we realize. Okay, so we've got these amazing bones forming our skeleton, but how do they actually move? That's where joints come in, right?
You got it. Joints are those points where two or more bones meet, and they're what allow for all that flexibility and movement we have.
Right. And there are different types of joints classified by how much movement they allow.
Yeah. You've got fibrous joints like the sutures in the skull, which allow for zero movement.
So those are like permanently fused together?
Pretty much. Then there are cartilaginous joints like the intervertebral discs in the spine, which are slightly movable.
Okay, so a little bit of give, but not a lot of movement.
Right. And then you have the synovial joints, which allow for the most movement. They're the ones we typically think of when we talk about joints, like the knees, elbows, shoulders, and hips.
Ah, so those are the ones that let us bend and twist and do all sorts of crazy things.
Exactly. And synovial joints have this really cool structure that allows for smooth, almost frictionless movement. They're surrounded by a joint capsule filled with synovial fluid, which acts as a lubricant.
Oh, so it's like oil in a car engine, keeping everything running smoothly.
A perfect analogy. And to further reduce friction, the ends of the bones are covered with articular cartilage, a smooth, slippery tissue.
Wow, so many clever adaptations for movement.
Right. And to make sure things don't get too out of control, ligaments, which are tough bands of connective tissue, help stabilize the joint and prevent excessive movement.
It's like a perfectly designed system, with every element playing a critical role.
It really is. But bones and joints can't move on their own, right? They need something to actually power that movement, and that's where muscles come in.
Ah, yes, muscles. The engines of movement. I'm ready to get pumped for this discussion.
All right, well, get ready to flex those mental muscles because we're about to dive into the world of muscle tissue. It's responsible for all types of movement in the body, from the beating of our heart to the blinking of our eyes.
And I know there are different types of muscle tissue, right?
You got it. We have skeletal muscle, which is what we consciously control. It's attached to bones by tendons, and it's what we use to move our bodies around, like when we walk, run, lift weights, or even just type on a keyboard.
So when I decide to reach for that cup of coffee, it's my skeletal muscles doing the work.
Exactly. Then there's cardiac muscle, which is found only in the heart. It's involuntary, meaning we don't have to consciously think about making our heart beat. Thank goodness for that.
Yeah, that would be exhausting.
Yes.
And there's one more type, right? Smooth muscle.
Yes. Smooth muscle is also involuntary, and it's found in the walls of internal organs, like the stomach, intestines, and blood vessels. It helps regulate the flow of substances through those organs.
Okay, so each type of muscle has a specific job to do, but I imagine they all rely on the same basic mechanism for contraction, right?
You're right. It's a fascinating process known as the sliding filament theory. Basically, it involves the interaction of two key proteins, actin and myosin. Imagine them as overlapping filaments within muscle fibers. When a muscle receives a signal from a nerve to contract, the myosin filaments pull on the actin filaments, causing them to slide past each other, shortening the muscle fiber and leading to contraction.
So it's like a microscopic tug-of-war happening inside each muscle fiber.
Exactly. And this process requires energy in the form of ATP.
Oh, right, ATP, the cellular fuel.
Yep. It's what powers all those muscle contractions.
So how is the force of a muscle contraction controlled? Like, how do we lift something heavy versus something light?
Well, it depends on a few factors, including the number of muscle fibers involved and the frequency of nerve stimulation. A small, delicate movement might involve just a few muscle fibers contracting slowly, while a powerful movement, like lifting a heavy weight, would involve many muscle fibers contracting rapidly. It's all about fine-tuning the response.
So the nervous system is calling the shots, telling the muscles when and how to contract.
Exactly. The brain and spinal cord work together to coordinate all those signals, ensuring smooth, coordinated movements.
Wow, it's amazing how all these systems are interconnected.
It really is. It's a beautiful example of how the body works as an integrated whole. Okay, so we've talked about muscles, which are the movers and shakers of the body. Now let's shift gears and explore the system that controls and coordinates everything. The nervous system. Are you ready to dive into the world of the brain, nerves, and all that jazz?
Absolutely. Let's get those neurons firing.
All right. So the nervous system is responsible for receiving, processing, and transmitting information throughout the body. It's like a high-speed communication network, constantly sending and receiving signals, allowing different parts of the body to talk to each other.
Like the internet of the body, connecting everything and keeping things running smoothly.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And like any well-organized system, the nervous system has two main divisions: the central nervous system, or CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, or PNS.
Okay, so CNS and PNS, what's the difference?
Well, the CNS is like headquarters. It includes the brain and spinal cord, which are the main decision makers. The brain is the command center, processing information and generating responses, while the spinal cord acts as the main communication pathway between the brain and the rest of the body.
So the CNS is like the big boss, calling the
Yeah.
shots.
Yeah, pretty much. And then the PNS is like the field agents carrying out the orders. It consists of all the nerves that extend from the CNS to the rest of the body, carrying sensory information from the body to the CNS and motor commands from the CNS to the muscles and glands.
Okay, so it's a two-way communication system. Sensory information going in, motor commands going out.
Exactly. It's like a constant feedback loop. And the key players in this communication network are specialized cells called neurons. They're the ones actually transmitting those signals.
Oh, right, neurons. Those fascinating cells with their dendrites, cell bodies, and axons. It's like our own biological wiring system.
It is, and those signals are transmitted in the form of electrical impulses called action potentials.
Okay, action potentials. Remind me how those work again.
Well, think of it like this. Imagine a wave of electrical activity sweeping down the axon of a neuron. That's an action potential. It's a rapid change in the electrical charge across the neuron's membrane, triggered by a stimulus.
Okay, so it's like an electrical signal traveling down the neuron.
Exactly. Now, when this electrical signal reaches the end of the axon, it encounters a junction called a synapse. And this is where things get really interesting.
Right, the synapse, that's where the signal has to jump from one neuron to the next. But how does that happen if it's an electrical signal?
That's the cool part. At the synapse, the signal is converted from electrical to chemical. Special molecules called neurotransmitters are released from the axon terminal of the first neuron, and they diffuse across a tiny gap called the synaptic cleft.
So it's like a relay race, where the baton is passed from one runner to the next.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. The neurotransmitters bind to receptors on the dendrites of the next neuron, triggering a new action potential in that neuron, and the signal continues on its way.
It's amazing how this all happens so quickly and efficiently.
It is. It's a beautifully orchestrated dance of electrochemistry. But of course, the most impressive part of the nervous system has to be the brain, right?
Oh, absolutely. The brain is the ultimate control center, the source of our thoughts, emotions, and everything that makes us who we are.
Right. The brain is composed of billions of neurons organized into intricate networks that we're still trying to fully understand. And it's divided into several regions, each with specialized functions.
Like the cerebrum, right? That's the big wrinkled part we usually picture when we think of the brain.
Exactly. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, and it's responsible for all those higher level functions like thinking, learning, memory, language, and conscious perception. It's what makes us uniquely human.
It's incredible how much is packed into that one organ.
It really is. And then you have the cerebellum, which is located at the back of the brain and plays a crucial role in coordinating movement, balance, and posture. It's what allows us to walk smoothly, ride a bike, and even dance.
So the cerebellum is like our internal choreographer, making sure all our movements are smooth and coordinated.
I like that. And then there's the brainstem, which connects the brain to the spinal cord. It controls those vital functions that keep us alive: breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, sleep-wake cycles. It's like our internal life support system.
Wow, it's like a whole city up there with different regions responsible for different tasks, but all working together seamlessly.
It is. It's a truly remarkable organ. Now, what about the spinal cord? What's its role in all of this?
Well, I know it's like a long cable running down our back, connecting the brain to the rest of the body.
That's right. It's a superhighway of information carrying signals back and forth.
Yeah.
It's also involved in reflexes, those rapid, involuntary responses to stimuli, like when you quickly pull your hand away from a hot stove.
Oh, right, reflexes. Those happen so fast we don't even have time to think about them.
Exactly. They're automatic responses that protect us from harm. And the spinal cord is a key player in those reflexes. It allows for those rapid responses without having to wait for instructions from the brain.
So it's like a bypass system, allowing for quick action in emergencies.
Yeah, you could say that. It's a very efficient system.
Okay, so we've got the nervous system, which is like the body's high-speed internet, constantly sending signals back and forth. But there's another communication system at play, right? The endocrine system.
You got it. The endocrine system might not be as fast as the nervous system, but it's just as vital for communication and control.
Okay, remind me, what exactly is the endocrine system?
It's a collection of glands that produce hormones, which are chemical messengers that travel through the bloodstream to target cells throughout the body.
So if the nervous system is like email, fast and targeted, the endocrine system is more like snail mail, slower, but with broader effects.
That's a great analogy. Hormones are like tiny messengers. each with a specific message to deliver to certain cells. They regulate a wide range of bodily functions like growth, metabolism, reproduction, mood, sleep, and even our response to stress.
Wow, so they're involved in a lot.
They are. And there are many key players in this endocrine network. For example, there's the pituitary gland, often called the master gland, because it controls the activity of many other endocrine glands.
So it's like the CEO of the endocrine system.
Exactly. Then you have the thyroid gland, which produces hormones that control metabolism, the pancreas, which releases insulin and glucagon to regulate blood sugar, and the adrenal glands, which pump out hormones like adrenaline to help us cope with stress.
It's amazing how these tiny chemical messengers can have such profound effects on our bodies.
It really is. And it all comes back to that concept of homeostasis we talked about earlier. The endocrine system is constantly working to keep everything in balance, ensuring all our bodily functions operate in harmony.
Okay, so we've got the nervous system for fast communication and the endocrine system for slower, broader control. What other amazing systems are we going to explore today?
Well, how about the system that keeps us alive? Literally, the cardiovascular system, our heart and blood vessels.
Oh, the cardiovascular system. I always think of that as being so essential, like the very core of our being.
It is. It's responsible for transporting blood throughout the body, delivering oxygen and nutrients to every single cell and carrying away waste products. It's like a non-stop delivery service, 25 and 4/7.
And at the heart of it all, literally, is the heart, that amazing pump that just keeps on beating.
Right. The heart is a four-chambered organ with 2 atria receiving blood and 2 ventricles pumping blood out. It's a beautifully synchronized system.
It's like a perfectly choreographed dance with blood flowing in and out, keeping everything in sync.
Exactly. And the blood travels through an intricate network of blood vessels, arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries carry oxygen-rich blood away from the heart. Veins carry oxygen-poor blood back to the heart. And capillaries are those tiny, thin-walled vessels where the exchange of oxygen, nutrients, and waste products actually takes place.
So it's like a complex highway system with different types of roads carrying different types of traffic.
A great analogy. And all this activity is happening within us right now, every second of every day, without us even having to think about it.
It's mind-blowing. So we've got blood flowing throughout the body, delivering all that good stuff. But where does that oxygen come from in the first place?
That's where the respiratory system comes in. It's all about taking in oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide.
Right. We breathe in air through our nose and mouth, and it travels down the trachea, also called the windpipe, to the lungs. What happens in the lungs?
Well, the lungs are these spongy, air-filled organs that contain millions of tiny air sacs called alveoli. They're like clusters of grapes.
And it's in those alveoli where the magic happens.
Exactly. The alveoli are surrounded by capillaries, and both the alveoli and the capillaries have incredibly thin walls. This allows for oxygen to diffuse from the inhaled air into the bloodstream, and for carbon dioxide to diffuse from the bloodstream into the air to be exhaled.
So it's like this amazing, efficient system for gas exchange happening right there in our lungs.
It is, and it all comes down to maximizing surface area for that exchange. The more surface area, the more efficient the exchange.
Okay, so we've got oxygen entering the bloodstream thanks to the respiratory system, nutrients entering through the digestive system, and the cardiovascular system delivering it all throughout the body. But what about getting rid of waste products?
That's where the urinary system steps in. It's the body's waste removal crew.
Right. So the urinary system, what organs are we talking about here? I know the kidneys are involved, but I'm not sure what else.
The kidneys are the stars of the show. They act like filters, constantly cleansing the blood, removing waste products, excess water, and electrolytes. They're essential for maintaining the body's delicate balance.
Wow, so they're like the body's internal cleaning crew, making sure everything stays tidy.
Exactly. And the kidneys produce urine, which carries those waste products out of the body. The urine travels from the kidneys through tubes called ureters to the bladder, where it's stored until it's time to be eliminated.
It's amazing how our bodies can filter out all that waste and keep things running smoothly.
It is. It's a very efficient system. Now, we've covered a lot of systems today, but there's one more we haven't talked about yet. One that's essential for the continuation of life itself.
Oh, you mean the reproductive system?
That's the one. It's responsible for, well, reproduction, creating new life.
It's incredible how our bodies are designed to create new life. I mean, it's like a miracle.
It is. It's a complex and intricate process, and it all starts with the male and female reproductive systems. The male reproductive system produces sperm cells, and the female reproductive system produces egg cells.
Right, and when those two cells meet, that's when fertilization happens, creating a zygote that eventually develops into an embryo and then a fetus.
Exactly. It's a remarkable journey of development, and each system plays a crucial role in ensuring the survival of that new life.
Wow, we've covered so much incredible information today. It's truly amazing to think about all the complex processes happening inside our bodies every second of every day.
I know, it makes you really appreciate the complexity and resilience of the human body. We truly are marvels of biological engineering.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It really makes you think about like all the things that have to go right for us to just, exist and function in the world.
It's pretty remarkable. And it all comes back to that idea of, interconnectedness that we talked about earlier. Everything's connected from the smallest atom to those complex organ systems, and it's all working together to keep us alive and, well, human.
Yeah, exactly. It's this incredible symphony of systems, all playing their parts in perfect harmony. Okay, so as we kind of wrap up our deep dive today, what are like some key takeaways you think are most important for our listeners to remember?
Well, I think one of the big ones is that structure and function are inseparable, right? The way something is built, the shape it has, those things directly determine what it can do.
Right, like how the alveoli in our lungs are all like folded and shaped to maximize surface area for gas exchange, or how those different layers of the skin each contribute to its protective function.
Exactly. And then we can't forget about homeostasis, that idea of maintaining a stable internal environment. It's like crucial for survival.
Yeah, it's like this constant juggling act, keeping all those variables in check, like temperature, pH, blood sugar levels. Our bodies are pretty amazing at keeping everything in balance, even when the world around us is changing all the time.
They really are. And of course, we've just scratched the surface of all those amazing organ systems, right? Each one has its own unique set of functions, but they're all working together to keep us alive and thriving.
From that protective barrier of our skin, to the communication network of the nervous system, to the life-sustaining functions of the cardiovascular and respiratory systems, and that waste removal crew of the urinary system. It's just like, wow. It really is mind-boggling to think about all those processes happening inside us every second of every day.
I know. It's pretty humbling, right?
It is. Okay, so as we finish up this deep dive, is there one like thought-provoking question you want to leave our listeners with? Something to kind of like spark their curiosity and get them thinking more about the human body?
That's a good one. Well, how about this? If every cell in our body has the same DNA, what makes them specialize into different types, each with its own unique job to do?
Ooh, that's a good question. We talked about how cells differentiate into like hundreds of different types, each with its own special structure and function, but what actually drives that process? Pretty mind-blowing.
It is. It's a question that's at the heart of developmental biology and something that scientists are still actively researching and trying to fully understand. But it really highlights, just how much potential is packed into each and every one of our cells.
It really does. So much we still don't know, which I think makes it all the more fascinating. Well, on that note, a huge thank you to you for taking us on this incredible journey through the human body. It's been a blast.
My pleasure. It was great to explore these amazing systems with you. And remember, everyone, there's always more to discover about this incredible machine we call home.
Absolutely. So, until next time, stay curious, everyone.